Good evening, and welcome to Democratic Television, a public affairs show where we discuss community issues and events that impact our democratic values. My name is Lisa Plawchan, and I will be your host this evening. Tonight, we will be discussing education, and more specifically, school vouchers and charter schools, and a new buzzword, educational savings accounts, or ESAs. You may have heard of them. There's a lot of information out there about vouchers, a lot of misinformation, and tonight we're going to be really trying to boil this down for you and make it as simple as possible because we want it to be shared with the community so that you can better educate and inform yourselves on this important issue. But this is a very lofty goal in 30 minutes, and so that's why I've called two very experts on education. So we have Lance McCold, who is a public education advocate, and Lauren Sorenson, who is with Tennessee Teachers United. Thank you both for being here. So let's begin because we have a lot to talk about. First of all, why don't we just define what are vouchers, what are these ESAs or educational savings accounts, and charter schools? Who would like to take that?
Well, vouchers are basically a way for parents to take money that would normally go into the public school system and use that to send their child to a private school or some sort of school outside the public school system. And the biggest problem with that is they're basically taking public tax dollars and using it for private entities, which normally is not done.
And these education savings accounts are a form of vouchers, which is basically they take money that would be going to public schools and give a certain amount into, some people have called it a cash card or a debit card. And they give it to them and then they say, go spend it on education, and you don't, then report to us on how you spend it. So the vouchers, the money actually doesn't go through the hands of the parents, but this ESAs, actually the money gets in their hands, and if it gets misspent, then the state has got the problem of discovering it was misspent and then recovering it later.
So they are slightly different, but the ESAs go directly to the parent, whereas the vouchers go through the school.
They are just different in how they work, but as we say, a voucher by any other name is still a voucher. Mm-hmm. It still is a process where you're taking public money and using it for private goods.
So what is the purpose of a voucher? What are we trying to achieve with a voucher?
Well, the narrative that's been put out there by the politicians that promote vouchers is that it is a way to help students who are in struggling schools, who may be lower socioeconomic class, and be able to give them a way to, in a sense, escape their environment, go to a better school, get a better education, and be more successful. And there's a couple problems with that scenario. First of all, it's not really healthy for those children to leave their environment. They need to be able to fulfill their full potential wherever they are. And the second thing is it's just basically a lie, because the vouchers are never enough for many poor children to actually cover all the expenses associated with private school, whether it's tuition, books, transportation, uniforms. So very, very, very few poor children are actually able to use them. So what ends up happening is students who are middle to upper class students are actually the ones who end up using those vouchers. So in a sense, you're basically taking taxpayers' dollars and paying to subsidize a family who could afford to go to a good school to allow them to do that for less costs out of their own pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you have something to add?
I guess this ESA that the governor's promoting would let families of four who make as much as $95,000 a year take these vouchers, these ESAs, and then if they're spending $10,000 or $12,000 on a private school, they could cut their costs to quite a bit by using the taxpayers' dollars to do it.
So is the desired outcome of a voucher or an ESA to improve the students' education or to close the achievement gap, or what is the desired outcome? Why are these being so heavily promoted right now in Tennessee?
Well, again, what you just said is the narrative that's being promoted, but really what the outcome is it makes a lot of money for people who are running the private schools. They're getting more children in. It also really makes a lot of money for the politicians who have been receiving campaign donations for the groups that push these sort of things. So, and it really depends on, where the private schools are coming from, who is behind the private schools, what their intended goals are. Because a lot of times private schools and charter schools, that's a little separate thing, but they don't necessarily have to have the same standards as public schools in terms of teacher certification, in terms of the materials and the services that they offer their students. So a lot of times they can cut costs that a public school can't. So then, whatever you're using to pay for those services, there's usually some left over. And somebody's making money off that.
Right.
The people who are promoting this like to call it school choice, but it's really, and that's really probably a pretty accurate description, because it really gives all the choice to the schools, not to the families. If, maybe some families who couldn't quite afford it would be under this ESA proposal, but the poor families, the less advantaged families, they're not going to have a choice. Kids who've got disabilities, kids who are not doing well academically, kids who've got behavioral problems, all of which the public schools are required by law to do our very, very best with. Though none of the private schools are not at all obliged to take any of those students, and I'm doubting many of them would.
In fact, as we've seen, the voucher program that Tennessee already has that was put through last year was centered around special education students. But the stipulation was, in order to partake of the voucher, those parents had to sign away their federal rights under IDEA for those students to receive the services that would be beneficial to them. Now, the private school may or may not have had the facilities to offer those services, but it leads you to believe that most of them don't, if part of the stipulation is you have to sign away your rights.
How is that program going? That was one of my questions. So you read my mind. Does a voucher program already exist? So one does exist. So how is that? Special education.
Well, I don't know that we've really seen any data come of that yet. It's very early on, but what we do know is there were not a lot of students that partook of it, and again, that goes back to the people that are pushing the vouchers. If they're opening up just a small door, a small window for vouchers to be used, it never just stays there. As we're seeing this year, this voucher program is much more expansive than the last one. And it's just a matter of getting your foot in the door. If we can get one small voucher program in, then we can gradually expand it. And that's where you get into the problem with paying basically for upper class kids to go to private school.
So we've talked a lot about funding because that's what vouchers are, but we haven't talked about how our public schools are funded. So I think it's important maybe that we talk about just very broadly how public schools here in Knox County are funded.
So I can say a little bit about that. The state gives money to the public schools in Tennessee with what they call the Basic Education Program, the BEP. And they send a certain amount of money. Well, maybe I should just say basic is an exaggeration, because they give what they say
less than basic.
Less than basic, yes. Remedial or something like that would be a better description of it, but that's what they call it. And so they say the basic program needs this much money, and currently their estimate is around $7,300 per student. Knox County spends about $9,500. Counties that care more, there's other counties nearby that spend $1,500 to $3,000 more per student than we do. Oak Ridge, Maryville, Alcoa. They have a choice. They have a choice of spending more. But let me just finish with the BEP. Yeah. So the BEP, they say $7,300, and then they tell the county, we're going to send you a certain fraction of that $7,300, and you have to match it with a certain amount. Knox County is one of the most prosperous counties in the state. And so for every $52 they send us, we have to match it with $48. So pretty close to half of the $7,300 that is in the BEP is paid by local taxpayers based on local property taxes and sales tax. A few other little things, but basically we have to match it with this. And anything else beyond the $7,300, which we obviously do, is 100% out of local taxpayers' money.
So how would these vouchers then impact that school budget?
Well, basically, the problem with vouchers and charters both come down to simple economics. You have a standard pool of students, and rather than investing that money directly in ways that affect all of those students, we're basically now paying, in the case of a charter school, for another building, utilities for that building, staffing and materials for that building. We haven't increased our pool of students, but now we're paying for another school. And in Knox County right now, we currently have one charter school, which is pulling $3 to $4 million out of our budget every year, just with one. Districts like Memphis and Nashville are overrun with charter schools, and they are really seeing the ill effects of that right now. And vouchers the same way, where, if I lose, or let's say my school loses 10 children to vouchers or charters, either one, it's not going to change the overhead costs for my school. Our utilities are still going to be the same. It's not going to be enough to lose a staff member. We're still going to be paying those expenses. My materials come packaged in groups of 5 or 6. So if I lose one student out of my room, I'm still going to pay that same price for my materials. So basically, you have the same pool of students, but now you have increased your costs significantly.
Right.
And, it's like, and people want to say, well, if my kid is not in that school, I should be able to take the money with me. Sounds like a great idea. But when you realize that taxes are there for the public good, it would be the same thing as if someone says, well, I have my own private security. I'm going to take my tax money that pays for police officers, and I'm not going to put that in the pool. Or I have a lot of books, so I'm not going to give away my tax money that goes for libraries. Or, I don't drive a lot, so I'm just going to keep my money, and I don't drive on certain roads, so I don't really want my tax money going for that. Well, everyone thinks that's ridiculous. Well, doing the same thing with tax money for charters and vouchers is absolutely no different.
That was a really good analogy. I've never thought of it that way, so that was really eye-opening. One thing I want to ask is, so we've kind of talked about the immediate effects on our local budget. What are the long-term effects of this? I mean, there are vouchers and charters in other states that have been around, so we do have some data from other states and how they've worked. So how has that impacted the local funding?
Well, the politicians that are pushing these programs always want to point to data where they say children have been successful in these schools. And that's really kind of a gray area. Some have been successful, some have not, some are about the same. But where the data is really clear is what happens to those school districts that are inundated with these programs. All the schools suffer. All the students that are left behind suffer because their funding goes way down. As we've seen across the nation this year, upwards of 7, 8 different states striking, the teachers striking, and they're not striking just for pay. If you pay close attention to what they're striking for funding for their students, because they've been decimated. The states that we've seen, in particular Arizona is a prime example that has a voucher charter model similar to what our governor is wanting to put in place. And they have some of the worst funding in the entire country. And when 90% of our students go to public school, why are we taking so much money out for such a small number of students? We should be investing where most of our students are.
Yes, I hear you there. One thing that I'd like to talk about is accountability, and how these voucher programs are held accountable for what they're supposed to be doing. So.
Well, on a national level, the studies that they've done with kids who've moved from public schools to private schools on vouchers, the studies have shown that they don't do any better than the kids who stay in their public schools. We don't have that experience in Tennessee because we haven't had but just a few students using the ESA for special needs students. But there's no reason to think that it would be any different here than it's been in these other states.
Well, and it was actually an issue that was brought up in the legislature last week about the fact that if federal or if our state dollars, if our tax dollars are going into these schools, there needs to be some sort of accountability. But currently, these schools are not required to take the entire battery of T and Ready tests that the public schools are required to take. Again, they don't have the same requirements for teacher licensure, that sort of thing. And there's actually a group in Tennessee right now that's called Pastors for Tennessee Children. And the unusual thing about them is because they come from, the faith-based community, one would think that, a lot of our private schools around here are faith-based, that they would be really for these programs. But what they realize is with government money comes government strings attached. And so a lot of these schools don't want the vouchers because they realize when they start accepting that money, they're going to be required to accept whatever the government wants attached to that sort of thing. And part of the reason they exist is to have the freedom to do things the way they want to do them.
Yes.
And they're big believers in separation of church and state in that respect. So, and that's the other problem. Without that accountability, we don't know what our public dollars are going toward because once they're released to that school, we have no control over how it's used.
So, and once it's released, those dollars, as I understand it, never return either. Is that correct? That's
one of those things that there's a lot of different stories going around. In theory, they are supposed to, but schools will often drag their feet in terms of withdrawing students, so you don't get the same amount of money that maybe you should get back. It just really depends on that school, but to say that the second that child leaves, the money comes back, we have not really seen happening on a consistent basis.
Yeah. I kind of want to ask, still along the lines of accountability, is how are voucher programs measured? We talked about, not taking the same tests and stuff. And then if there isn't a measurement, how are we going to tell if they are successful or not successful?
That's the $1 million question. And even then, some of the research that's out there is actually done by the groups that are proponents of charters and vouchers. So, it's kind of like, if I have a company and I want to prove that my company is good, I'm going to have my own research team in my company do an evaluation. Right. That's not very objective.
Well, we've even seen them go to the places saying, well, the kids who've taken the vouchers aren't doing much better. We admit that. But it's because the private schools are competing with the public schools that the public schools are doing better, which there's no evidence of. Right. And the economics suggests that it can't be true. Right. But they'll come up with argumentation to try to make it seem like they're doing well. I think for some of the people that are promoting this, if they get a lot of people to take the voucher or the ESA, they will say that's success. And what it happens to the students, I doubt that they really care.
Yeah.
But that's kind of interesting to think about when there's so much emphasis put on teacher evaluations and student evaluation and progress, especially with the testing that we have in place, that it almost doesn't make a lot of sense to not have any kind of measurement for these programs.
Well, we want to evaluate some people but not other people. If you're rich and powerful, we don't need to evaluate you. If you're a poor student, a poor teacher, we need to evaluate the heck out of you. And
one of the issues that we are seeing with these children, if you have children from these struggling communities going to a private school, we have seen that they don't generally fare any better at the private school because all the home life issues that they have that are probably affecting their ability to succeed in school are still going with them. At my school, which is a pretty middle-class suburban school, I still have children that are drastically affected by their home issues, and even in my school, which would be considered a good school, they struggle. And so the answer to all this is using our community schools model, which a lot of people may not be familiar with, but that is where the school partners with community entities to come in and help take care of some of those issues, whether it's medical services, dental services, counseling, after-school care, parenting classes. And what happens is the school gets together with those community resources and they decide what they need, because every school is different.
Yes.
And when you start taking care of those issues outside the school, that's when we start to see the success inside the school, because there's a saying that goes, no matter where you go, there you are. And it's no different for our children. Just because we take them from one situation and put them in another, it doesn't change who they are, and it doesn't change the baggage that some of them might come with.
So that was also something else I want to discuss today is solutions. If vouchers aren't the answer, then what are the solutions? So you mentioned community schools. What are some other solutions that to help?
So one of the things that I think we really need to do is invest more in social workers, counselors, psychologists. You know, the problems, we ought to be able to do something about the problems in the community that these kids are bringing to school, but at the very least we should be able to be supporting them in their schools. And that takes social workers, counselors, psychologists in some cases. Teachers they're supposed to be teaching, not doing these social services. I mean, I know they love to do if they can, but they usually can't. And so let me just quick to the next part. That stuff costs money. And if we bleed the money away for these programs like charter schools or vouchers, it's not going to be there for the kids that are in the public schools. And let me just pivot one thing and say, it's not just the kids who've come from difficult home lives. At Farragut High School, we had 3 kids commit suicide 2 years ago.
Right.
And can we say that if we'd had better support for them at the school, psychologists, people there to help them, that would have happened? It's not these poor kids from the poor community problem. It's across the whole community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and if you were to ask pretty much any teacher what would make education better, they'll probably tell you we need more teachers so we can have smaller class sizes, and we need more counselors and social workers, like Lance said. And the thing is, our politicians will do pretty much anything. They will fund anything other than that. Even when you go back to talking about school security, out of the blue, we have all these millions of dollars now for school security, but we didn't have that for more teachers and more counselors and social workers. We have all this money now to go for charters and vouchers. Where is that money when we've been begging for decades for more teachers and counselors? And it's really frustrating when they will do anything. They will fund anything else except what we've been telling them over and over that we really need, and that would make a difference.
Yes. I think these are excellent alternative solutions to vouchers, so I'm happy that you brought those up. I want to shift to talking about our local school boards and their opinions of vouchers. And so do you want to talk about how our school board feels about this, and
who wants to take that one?
I'll take it if you.
I don't care.
I'm trying to think of a school board that has come out in favor of charters and vouchers, and I can't think of one off the top of my head. I know in particular the Knox County School Board has been very vocal against charters and vouchers. However, one of our local legislators actually took the word of a former Knox County School Board chair that He himself actually was in favor of these programs and used that to say that the Knox County School Board was in favor when absolutely they were not. That was very disingenuous. But, you know, when a local school board realizes that they are losing funding and they're going to have to then possibly put pressure on their county commissions or city councils to raise taxes to make up for the difference, they don't want to be put in that position. They want to do what's best for the kids that they are tasked with taking care of, as our state government should. In our Constitution, our politicians are tasked with providing for public education. Nowhere in our Constitution are they tasked with providing for private education. So I'm not sure where that duty has gotten confused on their part.
You know, and I will note that people like to, some politicians that are for these other things, oh, they all care all about the money. Well, you know, the school board does care about the money, but it doesn't do anything for them personally.
Right.
They care about it because they care about the students. They care about the kids that are in our schools. And they know that all those things they can't do because they don't have the money. So when the school, when you say the school board is concerned about the money, it's not a selfish thing. It's a thing of caring about the students, just what they are supposed to be doing.
Yes.
In Knox County, we are extremely lucky, and it's extremely rare to have a majority of the members on the school board that are former educators. So they feel it as much as anybody when programs have to be cut and when they have to say no to kids or to educators. They only have so much money to use, and so it's a juggling game, and to force them into even tougher situations because of a lack of funding, which is going to come. It's, if these programs pass the legislature, it's not a matter of if our funding is affected, it is when, and it will start next year. As soon as these programs are in place, we will start to see the effects on our budget, and it's going to be devastating. Again, I bring up Memphis schools and Nashville Metro schools. Their school boards are just in chaos right now trying to figure out how to fund programs, just basic programs for their children. We've been able to avoid it here in Knox County, I would like to think, because there are so many people here that have educated themselves and they know we're ready, hopefully, to fight back. But you know, if these things pass on the state level, we may not be so lucky.
So we're almost coming to the close of our program, but I want to just kind of piggyback off the local school boards. So if our local school boards, as I'm hearing a majority of them, or you can't think of one that is in favor of vouchers, are opposed to vouchers, and it sounds like teachers are opposed to vouchers, then who other than the legislators are really pushing it to?
Again, the people that are able to make money off these different schools. There's a lot of money in the charter school industry, a lot of money there. And, you know, and whether it's ties to textbook companies or the real estate developers that are going to be involved in putting forth the buildings for these schools, there's a lot of money to be had. It has absolutely nothing to do with what's best for our kids.
Yeah.
There's also, I guess it's worth noting that there's a lot of money that's coming in terms of lobbyists to our legislature. Hundreds of thousands of dollars every year from these national organizations that are trying to, you know, that are all for privatizing our public schools, undermining and breaking them down and forcing them to be replaced by private schools.
And our governor in particular had huge campaign donations from these groups.
So we have a few seconds left. If someone's watching tonight and wants to do something about this, what's something they can do?
Call their legislator, email, write their legislator, show up in Nashville. These bills are going through the committees and to the floor within the next couple weeks. They need to hear from you. Face to face is absolutely the best way to talk to these legislators and let them know that you're not okay with it, because they want to push the narrative that Tennesseans want this. And I firmly believe that the majority of them don't.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you again on DTV very soon. Thank you so much.